everybody. It is Tuesday, February 27th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And we poll you on how you prefer to pronounce pistachio. Jill, we have some results.
Drum roll, please. Moshe, tell us, did the Mo News community agree with my pronunciation, pistachio, or with
Correct.
yours, pistachio?
It appears, based on the first 8,000 votes on Instagram, Jill, that by a margin of 62% to 38%, people are on Team Jill, pistachio.
Yay! Finally!
It's almost exactly the same margin that Trump beat Nikki Haley in South Carolina by an overwhelming margin. And so, Jill, I guess officially now, I'm going to have to, at least for the purposes of this podcast, refer to it as a pistachio.
It is possible that it's just, I'm from New York, that it could just be a dialect type of thing where,
Sure.
And more of our audience might be from this area.
Jill, there's a lot of biases we have not controlled for in this poll. It's not a scientific poll by any stretch of the imagination. It's people who happen to pull up my Instagram account, our Instagram account, for several hours on a Monday. And of course, you made a push and your people concentrated in a certain geographic area. And so, listen, I think there's a lot of, I'm going to go with it despite the lack of scientific nature. But that's where we're at, pistachio. So Team Pistachio, Mazel Tov. Congrats to all of you. We are a democracy when it comes to certain aspects of this podcast, and pronunciation is one of them.
Well, I really worked to get out the vote this morning, and somebody actually did message me saying that she and her daughter were listening to the podcast on their way to school, and they did feel like your pronunciation was a bit bougie, their word.
Acceptable. I take responsibility for my bougie pronunciation, and I will work to be less bougie on a daily basis for all of you. Jill, one more thing before we get started here. We have to begin by saying bye-bye to our favorite moon lander, Odysseus. We thought it would last through the week, and yet it landed on its side. It tripped over its legs. NASA thought it could make it work for a few days. Not so much. So Odysseus going dark today. Just a few hundred miles from the south pole of the moon. We didn't know you long, Odysseus, but we're going to miss you.
It is so sad. I was trying to think of a good analogy or metaphor. And as a marathon runner, the best analogy that I could think of is, making it to like mile 25 and a half or even mile 26 and just not being able to do that last 0.2 and training so hard.
Or I would say this. Maybe another way to describe it is you finish the marathon, but you immediately fall over and you can never walk again.
Okay. Fair enough.
Like you got there.
Both sound pretty bad.
The U.S. got to the moon for the first time since 1972, landed something, the first private company to get to the moon. You made it. You land. You fall over. Ta-ta. So anyway, just for you space nerds out there, we love to cover space developments, and there's a quick update for you on that story.
Okay, let's get to some news here. The U.S. government says nope to a merger that would bring the two largest grocery chains together, and the latest on the increasing price of groceries and what the Kellogg's CEO is suggesting consumers do about it. The Supreme Court hearing cases on free speech and social media. We'll break down what they're both about. Plus, we're learning more about the man who set himself on fire outside of the Israeli embassy in Washington this weekend. Presidents Biden and former President Trump both set to visit the U.S.-Mexico border this week as the battle over immigration heats up. Moshe, as we've been referring to it at the Mo News office, the dueling border visits.
Yes, both Biden and Trump trying to now spin the border issue to their advantage. It's going to be something we're going to be watching this week and through November.
NATO is officially set to expand again.
Yes, they welcome country 32 into the alliance. We'll explain what that means.
If you thought measles was a thing of the past, it's back. The latest state trying to contain an outbreak. And surge pricing, not just for Ubers, which fast food giant could be trying it out. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill will dive into the history of Mardi Gras. key date in the history of that celebration, and also a significant day in media history here in the U.S., and what Walter Cronkite said and how President Johnson reacted just a couple weeks later.
All right, the U.S. government is suing to block the $25 billion Kroger Albertsons grocery mega merger, saying it will cause higher food prices and lower pay for workers. The stores, though, say that this deal will do the opposite. And it comes as consumers are struggling with inflation at the supermarket. Many are turning to store brand groceries over name brands as a way to save money. So the FTC, along with 9 states' attorneys general, took steps yesterday to stop the largest supermarket deal in history. The feds say that it would leave consumers and workers in some regions of the United States with little choice or bargaining power. Since the merger was announced 16 months ago, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, which represents 835,000 grocery workers in the U.S. and Canada, has voted to oppose it. Other critics, including consumer advocates, politicians, unions, and independent grocery store chains, say that combining Kroger and Albertsons would create a powerful giant with revenue of more than $200 billion and about 5,000 stores. They're concerned that it would be bad for consumers and that the stores would have less reason, given their size and lack of competition, to improve customer experience. Kroger, on the other hand, saying that merging with Albertsons will help them compete with non-unionized big box retailers like Walmart, Amazon, and Costco, which can use their size to negotiate better prices with manufacturers and suppliers, which is, they say, a benefit to consumers. Okay, so go back to manufacturers and suppliers. So Kroger's saying that their tie-up would let them essentially do the same, and that ultimately that is a benefit to consumers. New data that we've spoken about on this pod shows that consumers are spending 11.3% of their disposable income on food at both grocery stores and restaurants in 2022, which is the most that food costs have eaten up Americans' paychecks in over 30 years. Grocery prices have risen by 25% since the pandemic, outpacing overall inflation of 19% during the same period. Companies are blaming labor shortages, rising minimum wages, supply chain disruptions, and environmental factors. But President Biden and other lawmakers are blaming corporate greed. They are pointing to price gouging, grocery stores' profit margins being higher than their pre-pandemic levels, and shrinkflation. That is when companies reduce a product's size but charge the same. So that bag of potato chips, not quite as many potato chips as they used to have.
Fewer chips, more air. When we're talking about Albertsons and Kroger's, by the way, we're talking about the many brands that they own. We're talking about a couple dozen grocery stores. So think Safeway, think Ralph's, think Jewel Osco, think Harris Teeter. So depending on where you are in the country, there is likely a grocery store either owned by Albertsons or owned by Kroger's near you. That's the concern here. Now, we've been tracking this for more than a year now. They announced this tie-up in late 2022, and there's been a lot of concern when it comes to antitrust here. Kroger did announce last year they plan to sell about 400 stores to Piggly Wiggly to try to assuage concerns. And yet it appears here that the federal government, a number of states say that ain't enough. It comes, as you noted, as grocery prices continue to skyrocket here. And there's a concern that this even larger grocery store would not be good for consumers. And it does come as consumers are now going to store brands, the less expensive store brands, as opposed to name brands, as these prices have gone up. It has led some of the name brands to start to decrease prices ever so slightly. But that does come after significant increases in recent years. Unilever, which owns Ben & Jerry's ice cream and Dove soaps, has increased prices more than 13% over the last couple of years. And one example of the savings you can have, and I'm sure it's obvious to a number of you, between generics and name brands over on Kroger's website. We saw that a 17-ounce box of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes cost $5.79. Whereas a 26-ounce box, an even bigger box of Kroger's brand cereal, their generic Frosted Flakes, cost $3.29. We bring up cereal because cereal is in the news here, Jill. The Kellogg's CEO, Gary Pilnick, was on CNBC last week, and some of his remarks are getting a lot of attention. We posted a clip on the Instagram feed yesterday. He's suggesting, it's part of a larger effort at Kellogg's, that in order to fight rising food costs, that some consumers should consider eating cereal for dinner at a much more significant savings for their family. Here's a bit of that CNBC interview.
So we're advertising about cereal for dinner. If you think about the cost of cereal for a family versus what they might otherwise do, that's going to be much more affordable. And in general, the cereal category is a place that a lot of folks might come to because the price of a bowl of cereal with milk and with fruit is less than $1. So you can imagine why a consumer under pressure might find that to be a good place to go.
Right. I'm all for innovation and marketing, but the idea of having cereal for dinner, is there the potential for that to land the wrong way?
We don't think so. In fact, it's landing really well right now, Carl. When we look at all of our data, of course, we would know that breakfast cereal is the #1 choice for in-home consumption. We understand that for breakfast. It turns out that over 25% of our consumption is outside the breakfast occasion. A lot of it's at dinner, and that occasion continues to grow.
So you heard there CNBC's Carl Quintanilla asking Pilnick if he thought that the suggestion had the potential to land the wrong way. Pilnick saying, absolutely not.
Well, Pilnick may not necessarily have his finger on the pulse here. On social media, the comments received a fair share of criticism. One viewer suggesting that perhaps they, quote, eat the rich instead. Moshe, I know you posted this on the Mo News Instagram account. Curious what the response was there.
It's pretty overwhelmingly negative when it comes to that remark. Some people saying it's the new let them eat cake or let them eat flake, if you will. And so some people having fun in the comments there. Some people saying this is a serious issue. Some people, of course, more sympathetic to Kellogg's CEO here, saying, listen, it's his job to try to convince us to eat cereal 24/7. So, there is a case to be made that it is in fact cheaper to eat cereal. But a lot of people saying, it's not the healthiest thing to eat for dinner. And given his 7-figure income, would he consider eating cereal for dinner on a regular basis? So it seems, at least as far as our community is concerned, that the remarks did land not so well. Though, Jill, we were texting about this before the podcast, saying, who doesn't like cereal for dinner once in a while?
Breakfast for dinner, quite popular in my house. And in fact, one of your wife's recipes, banana dippers, go-to in my house, especially for dinner, because I don't have time to make it in the morning. I mean, it's basically bananas dipped in pancake batter, and I don't have time to make it in the morning before school, but it's the perfect dinner. So I don't hate it, but I understand the frustration at his comments.
Yeah, listen, there's been a number of restaurants that have been trying to make breakfast happen for a long time. Fast food companies that try to make breakfast happen. You have breakfast foods trying to become dinner foods. So totally makes sense from their vantage point. I think that just given what we've laid out here, given what we've discussed on the podcast, the sensitivity around grocery prices, around food prices, that it is becoming a third rail of sorts, that people are spending extreme amounts of money on food. So given the timing here of that campaign and the way it was expressed, clearly some people here not loving those remarks.
Look, grocery prices, as we mentioned, food prices up 25% since before the pandemic. Most people have not seen their paychecks go up by 25%. That is the bottom line.
And if you annualize that, that's thousands of dollars. For the average household if you have kids. So, Jill, we've been hearing from people who are going to the generic store brands, who are looking to more discount grocers to get their groceries, especially as those prices have gone up. We did note that with people moving to these store brands, you are seeing the impact on those main brands. Remember, at the end of the day, folks, you're the consumer. You have the power of the purse. With your purchasing decisions, you do impact in mass the decisions of these companies. So, there's that. And then you see the feds at a government level intervening in that larger merger between the two larger grocers, Albertsons and Kroger's. So rest assured, Jill, chief grocery correspondent here, will stay on top of this for all of us.
Oh, you know it.
Yeah.
Now to the Supreme Court, which heard two big cases that could have a huge impact on free speech and social media. These cases are based on laws out of Florida and Texas, which look at restricting the ability of social media companies like Facebook and YouTube to moderate controversial or political content. After almost 4 hours of oral arguments yesterday, a majority of the justices appeared to have some concerns that there is a free speech issue with stopping the big tech platforms from barring or limiting the reach of some problematic users. At the same time, justices from the left and the right also raised fears about the power and influence of big social media platforms, as I mentioned, like YouTube or Facebook, and questioned whether the state laws should be blocked entirely. So these laws were first enacted by the Republican-led states in 2021, and it came after Twitter, Facebook, and others banned former President Trump after January 6th. So the Florida law prevents companies from banning public figures running for political office and restricts shadow banning. That's when a certain user's content is just made difficult to find by other users. The state claims that such actions are a form of censorship. The Texas law similarly prevents platforms from banning users based on the views that they express. And then you've got trade groups repping the companies that say both laws infringe upon their free speech rights of companies under the Constitution's First Amendment by restricting their ability to choose what content they wish to publish on their platforms. First Amendment free speech protections apply to government actions, not those by private entities, including companies. And Moshe, I think that that is something important to remember, that these companies, as big as they are and as pervasive as they are private companies.
Yeah, people bring up the First Amendment all the time. Well, companies can do whatever they want. They don't have to abide by that. They're a private company, and you, the consumer, can make a choice as to whether you want to use the services of that company. And so that's important, as the First Amendment is constantly thrown out there. So you saw Florida and Texas here pass these laws. By the way, they haven't been enacted. They've been frozen here as this case has been moving up through the court system. So you have the Supreme Court here in a difficult spot, as you laid out, both concerned about the size and reach of these companies, but also concerned about the states here passing laws that infringe upon these companies' ability to do what they want in a free society. As you listen to the arguments here, both from the liberal and conservative justices, they did signal that they want a more developed record here about how the law would operate. The issue they had with these laws is they're pretty vague, and they weren't written specifically enough. So you heard some criticism from the justices when it comes to the laws out of Texas and in Florida, trying to limit YouTube and social media, again, written in a very vague way. To our discussion here, you did hear Chief Justice John Roberts note in the arguments yesterday that because the companies are not bound by the First Amendment, they can discriminate against particular groups that they don't like. When you're a business, you have a lot of leeway as to what you can do with your services, who you can serve, etc. One of the complicating factors, though, is these companies are huge. And these social companies like Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, etc., also have direct messaging. Keep in mind as well that Google, which owns YouTube, also has the Gmail email service. So there's both public posting of comments and speech, etc., but they also have private messaging and email operations. Not surprisingly, these state laws were not written specific enough. They're written in a very vague way. So the court noted that the way Florida especially wrote their law, it could also include Uber, it can include Etsy. It's a very general law. So the Supreme Court here has an option, and it looks like they might take it, where they kick this back down to lower courts to adjudicate this further. The key issue with this case right now is whether to lift the injunctions that were imposed by the lower courts, as in these laws were passed but are not currently being enforced because lower courts blocked it while it was going up through the chain. It does not appear like the Supreme Court is eager to allow these laws to be enacted immediately because, again, they have issues with the specificity here. They're going to kick this back down. So we'll see what happens here. The court could rule here in the coming weeks and months. Typically they announce their big decisions at the end of June. This one could come sooner, but it does speak to a lot of the issues the court is facing now that we don't quite have laws on the books yet, which is social media, these big tech companies, and interpreting, laws, the Bill of Rights that's been around for more than 200 years to apply to these tech companies, especially as large as they are and the influence they have on American society.
And Moshe, we're, of course, in an election year, which means that there are real ramifications here, depending on which way the Supreme Court rules.
Yeah, all the candidates are using social media for their purposes, to get out the vote, to put out their messaging. And so any rules that apply to social media companies in election year could have a really significant impact.
Time for the speed read from the New York Times, a follow-up to a story we first told you about yesterday. The Air Force active duty airman who had set himself on fire outside of the Israeli embassy in Washington Sunday has died of his injuries. The Metropolitan Police Department in Washington identified the man as Aaron Bushnell of San Antonio. He was 25 years old. He lit himself on fire in protest of civilian deaths in Gaza, yelling "Free Palestine" as he doused himself in fuel and then lit the match. Bushnell filmed the protest and live streamed it on the social media platform Twitch. He was dressed in fatigues and noted that he was an active duty Air Force officer. A LinkedIn profile matching his name describes him as an aspiring software engineer and an active duty airman for nearly 4 years. He said in the video, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide," echoing language that opponents of Israel's military offensive in Gaza have been using to describe the war.
The video, which has been taken offline, but is visible if you dig around for it on social media, does show law enforcement officers approaching him seconds before the fire catches. One is heard off camera saying, "Can I help you, sir?" The officers scrambled for more than a minute to put out the flames. The first ones to put out the flames were U.S. Secret Service officers who were stationed outside the embassy. This is the second such incident, Jill. Back in December, there was a woman in Atlanta who's lit herself on fire outside the Israeli consulate there, also protesting the war. A security guard in that case put out the fire, also suffering major burns in the process, and has a long road to recovery himself. Jill, zooming out here for a second, we learned late Monday President Biden is hopeful about a temporary ceasefire and hostage deal taking effect by next Monday, so less than a week from now. He says that he hopes it'll be a done deal by the weekend. The two sides still have a lot of things to work out in terms of who is exchanged in what order. The last one of these that we saw was over a week in November. Since then, the war has proceeded for more than 2 months. But it appears here the president thinks a deal can be done by next Monday. Again, a temporary ceasefire deal that would exchange hostages for prisoners, but not a permanent ceasefire deal.
From PBS, a busy day on the U.S. border on Thursday this week as President Biden and former President Trump will be making dueling trips. It comes as both candidates try to turn the nation's broken immigration system to their political advantage in an expected campaign rematch this year. So Biden will be traveling to Brownsville, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. It's an area that often sees large numbers of border crossings. He will meet border agents and talk about the need for bipartisan legislation. He visited El Paso in January of last year. Trump, for his part, will be heading to Eagle Pass, Texas. That's about 325 miles away from Brownsville, another hotspot in the state-federal clash over border security. Am I the only one, Moshe, who was hoping they were going to go to the same town at the same time?
Don't doubt it, Jill. There's a scenario, maybe Trump goes and says, you know what, let's go visit Biden on the border and say, what took you so long? This has been an issue that Trump and Republicans have been stressing for a long time now. The border has been seen as a huge vulnerability for the White House, especially in recent months. And you've seen Biden and Democrats realize pretty quickly as the numbers have escalated across the border, and the migrant crisis has not been isolated to the border, but you see it now happening in the Chicagos and the New Yorks and cities across America, that they have to figure out a way to deal with it. Now, interestingly, President Biden and the White House see this as an advantageous issue because there was that compromise we've been telling you about on Capitol Hill that Republicans now oppose. So Biden's saying, listen, I'm ready to do stuff on the border. It's the Republicans over in the House and in the Senate who don't want to do anything. He says, it's Trump who has told Republicans, don't do anything while Biden's president. We'll do something better next year, saying if it's so much of a crisis, let's deal with it now. So he's been critical of Republicans. And Jill, you covered the race in the 3rd District of Long Island, the Santos seat, where the Democrat there who won, Swazi, decided to be critical of Biden on this issue, trying to take the immigration issue head on, as opposed to run from it, as you've seen many Democrats do over the past year.
Right. And we'll see if that is going to be a blueprint for other candidates as they run, especially in these swing districts where it's independents who really make the difference.
Yeah. And so you have Biden here heading to the border. The Trump people will note that he had his border visit planned first, and the White House is following him to the border. So the White House clearly saw an opportunity here to schedule their visit on the same day Trump is set to be there. This is something we're going to be watching throughout the week, see if maybe Trump decides to move up his visit, if there's other shenanigans. So this is an interesting thing to watch here. The Trump camp saying, too little, too late, Biden. It took you forever to call this a crisis. You haven't dealt with it for a couple of years. You're chasing him because this is the worst immigration crisis in history. You've had more than 7 million border crossings in the last 3 years. That is 3 times the number we saw during the Trump administration, though COVID is partially blamed for that with the border being shut down there. Still, this issue is resonating. You have a number of Democratic governors, including in New Mexico and Arizona, Democratic mayors like Mayor Adams in New York, who are all saying, Biden, where you been? We need to take this issue more seriously. So this all underscores the importance of immigration here. It's become the number one issue for voters, not just Republican voters. You see it rising among independents as well as Democrats here. So we're going to watch what takes place over the next couple of days here, what happens at the border on Thursday, and how this issue unfolds over the course of the next 8 months here. Jill, one other thing we're going to be watching today, Michigan voters go to the polls today. So we'll see how the issue plays there. Haley trying to win her first state, again, looking unlikely. And the interesting thing on the Democratic side, we've covered it over on the Instagram account and mentioned it yesterday, you could see a number of people in the state vote uncommitted as opposed to Biden on the Democratic side to register their lack of support for the president, specifically when it comes to the Middle East. You have a large Arab American and Muslim population. So we'll be looking at those numbers tonight. All of that will be covered over on our premium Instagram account, Mo News Team account. So make sure to join over at mo.news/premium.
From the Financial Times, Sweden set to become NATO's 32nd member, possibly within the week, completing a process that started with Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine and saw Finland join last year. Hungary's parliament approved Sweden's NATO membership on Monday, ending months of delays. All NATO members must unanimously approve a member application. Sweden sold Hungary fighter jets to help close the deal. The Swedish prime minister announcing yesterday Sweden is leaving 200 years of neutrality and military non-alignment behind. We are joining NATO in order to defend what we are and everything we believe in even better. We are defending our freedom, our democracy, and our values together with others. The addition of Sweden, along with Finland last year, will bolster the alliance's capabilities, strengthening its position in the High North and the Baltic Sea. Sweden will formally join the alliance after completing final details with the United States.
Yeah, so NATO has an open door policy here. If you look at the progress of NATO over the course of the past 80 years, it was initially just Western Europe and the U.S. and Canada, hence NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as the Soviet Union at the time controlled the East. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, they allowed more and more countries into it, to Russia's chagrin, to Putin's frustration. But with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, you saw Finland and Sweden say for the first time, we might need this alliance. We've been doing our own thing for a while, but we don't necessarily trust Putin. So while Putin says he's very much against the growth of NATO here, his invasion has now caused NATO to grow further. By the way, Finland is significant because that's 800 miles of border between Finland and Russia. So that doubles the amount of border that literally NATO borders Russia. Sweden's significant. They haven't been in a war since 1814. They've been neutral for 200 years. And so that's significant that they're in it. We've been reporting this for a while, but the Hungarians and the Turks in particular have been holding this up over various grievances they have with both countries. The Swedes and the Finns have been trying to accommodate their concerns, be critical of Hungary getting away from democracy, becoming more authoritarian. The Hungarian leader there, Orban, not so into how Sweden's been talking about him. So he's just been holding this up. Turkey was much more specific in what they wanted. Nonetheless, it's now unanimous. All 31 countries are now approving of Sweden. So they're in, which means they're officially granted Article 5 status. That's the key portion of the treaty, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. Some of you, by the way, asking, when does Ukraine get let into NATO? There has been a lot of rhetoric about that. Don't expect that to happen anytime soon. There are concerns about the state of Ukraine's democracy, corruption, but more significantly, if they let Ukraine into NATO, that would immediately trigger Article 5, would put all of NATO at war with Russia. So while the ongoing hostilities are happening, expect NATO countries to continue to aid Ukraine, give them military equipment, but not necessarily let them into NATO because they don't want a direct war with Russia.
From ABC News, a mini measles outbreak in Florida is expanding. As of Monday, health officials in Broward County confirmed an 8th case of the virus, including one in a child under the age of 5. The CDC reported that as of this weekend, there have been at least 35 measles cases in 15 states in 2024. Most are related to international travel. Florida's outbreak is the largest in the U.S. right now. And what Florida's health officials are doing or not doing is drawing fire from experts who study the way that diseases spread. The state's Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, is letting parents decide whether to quarantine their children or let them keep going to school. And some critics say that could allow cases to spread. After at least 6 cases were confirmed at a Manatee Bay elementary school in Weston, Ladapo told parents in a letter that the state's health department was deferring to them for decisions about school attendance for unvaccinated children. But the CDC recommends that unvaccinated students stay home for 3 weeks after they are exposed, with exposure considered being in the same classroom because of the way measles is transmitted in the air and on surfaces.
Yeah, measles can sit in you for a while without you showing symptoms. So that's the reason why they have these prolonged recommendations. Now, Ladapo appeared to agree with the assessment from the CDC before he concluded that children's attendance is up to the parents. He wants to make it their choice because of the overall high immunity rate. The vast majority of kids do have the measles vaccine, but not all, clearly, in this case. Unvaccinated people actually have a 90% chance of becoming infected if exposed, which shows how powerful the vaccine actually is. Measles is one of the most infectious pathogens in humans that we know of. One expert describing measles as a heat-seeking missile. It'll find the people who are not immune, and they're going to get sick. And so the issue in Florida is that he's making it a parental choice. In other states, as they've been fighting this, they've been much more aggressive in fighting it, giving very specific recommendations, not making it the choice of the parents. In Pennsylvania, there have been 9 measles cases, 8 in Philadelphia. Though if no more cases are reported this week, the Philadelphia outbreak will officially be declared over. Late Friday, Michigan's health department said that it has identified a measles case, its first in 5 years. Ohio is an example of them being very effective in knocking out a small outbreak. This happened in 2022. They had a major vaccine push. The authorities there saying that parents are looking for very specific recommendations. And so they pushed for people to get the MMR vaccine as a form of post-exposure prophylaxis. They changed the 21-day quarantine down to 72 hours if kids got the shot, and they were able to knock it out pretty quickly. So we'll watch these cases in Florida and keep you guys up to date.
In New York and a lot of states, actually, children who are in public schools, K through 12, and even college students are required to have 2 doses of the MMR vaccine, which covers measles. The issue, as we've seen, is that a lot more people are asking for exemptions from the vaccines. Yeah,
we've seen that especially in light of a rise in vaccine skepticism post-COVID.
And finally, from the New York Post, Wendy's is preparing to test an Uber-style surge pricing model where prices will fluctuate throughout the day based on demand, meaning a burger would cost more during the lunchtime rush. Wendy's new CEO, Kirk Tanner, announcing the new system on a call with investors, noting that the pricing menu will begin testing in 2025. With the dynamic pricing model, the chain's iconic Dave's single quarter pounder burger, recently priced at $5.99 at a Wendy's in Newark, New Jersey, could increase by as much as $1 at lunchtime. Alternatively, during mid-morning and late afternoon, when there's a lull, the price could dip below $5.99 by as much as $1. As the prices will continue to shift, Wendy's will be relying on digital menu boards so that customers know how much they're going to pay. The price of Wendy's quarter-pound cheeseburger, known as a Dave's Single, actually already differs depending on location.
Yeah, for example, you mentioned a Newark location. They noted in the New York Post, it's $5.99 there. But if you happen to go to the Wendy's in Times Square, Square, the same burger cost $8.19, more than $2 above that price. Though I don't recommend the Wendy's in Times Square, Jill. I feel like New York City, you got a lot of options.
I mean, I don't recommend Times Square, period.
It's good to hear they are going with the digital menu boards. I was going to feel for those employees that constantly have to go back up on like a chair. We got to raise it. We got to raise it. Oh, we got to lower it again.
Bring out the ladder.
It's back up again. We just got a phone call. Raise the price again. Wait, we have a big line. Okay, there's no line. No one's come here for 10 minutes. Lower the price again. Jill, we joke, but this is actually the reality in countries that experience a lot of very high inflation, where, you buy something in the morning and the price is different in the afternoon. Here, again, they're following the model of Uber and Lyft, which is based on demand. They're going to raise prices, lower prices. By the way, when they put this into effect, it could mean that a cheeseburger in New York City at Wendy's at lunchtime could rise above $10, not including a drink and fries. So we'll see how consumers feel about this, while it's accepted with Uber and Lyft, whether it'll be accepted at fast food shops like Wendy's. Wendy's already, by the way, the most expensive fast food chain in America. Their prices have risen 35% over the last couple of years post-COVID. So you, the consumer, as we tell you, will be the voter here. Jill, I used to like the number 6 at Wendy's, the spicy chicken, though I haven't gotten it in a number of years. I wonder what the surge pricing will be there.
George likes his chicken spicy.
Jill, I feel like the Seinfeld references have been far and few between lately.
Because I felt like I was forcing it. And so I kind of took a little bit of a pause, but I do get notes from people all the time like, you missed the most obvious Seinfeld reference. and I realize it. I'll try to bring them back.
Jill, do an analysis of the stories we're doing and just spend a half an hour with yourself being like, does this relate to any episode?
Well, what's going to happen is, given that we pick the stories that we cover, is that I'm going to start picking stories based
that
on
have a direct relationship to them.
Which is really not the responsible way to choose news stories.
No,
for a
folks.
podcast.
We're trying to choose the stories that matter the most, not the ones that remind Jill of sitcoms of the 1990s. All right. Speaking of the 1990s, we'll get there eventually. We begin now with On This Day in History in the 1800s. On this day in 1827, nearly 200 years ago, a group of masked and costumed students danced through the streets of New Orleans, marking the beginning of the city's famous Mardi Gras celebrations. The celebration of Carnival spread from Rome across Europe and then eventually to the Americas. It was actually brought earlier than that by the French settlers to the Gulf Coast in the 1600s. However, Spanish governors who took control of that area for a long time banned the celebrations. In the 1800s, the Louisiana Territory becomes part of the U.S. New Orleans residents convinced the city to allow them to celebrate Mardi Gras again, bring those celebrations back. And so this first celebration was a group of French students who had partied in Paris in previous years and brought it to New Orleans. All right, fast forward to the 20th century here. On this day in 1951, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, limiting a president to just 2 terms in office. We take for granted now that presidents can only serve 2 terms, but that wasn't always the case. And so on this day in 51, that was ratified. Fast forward a little bit. On this day in 1968, Walter Cronkite, considered at one point to be the most trusted man in America, broke from his usual objectivity to predict that the Vietnam War could end only in a protracted stalemate. Listen to his commentary on the CBS Evening News, which at one point was getting more than 100 million viewers a night, on this night in 1968.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
So this was notable because Cronkite was just the facts, but clearly after reporting on several years of Vietnam here, seeing what was going on, he decided to have a little bit of commentary at the end of the show. Notably, he's given credit for helping to shift American opinion further than it already was. Remember, 1968 already had huge protests in the streets over the war. Notably, 33 days after this broadcast, President Lyndon Johnson announced he was not running for re-election, partially due to the issues in Vietnam and just the lack of popularity he was facing. He could have run for another term there in 68. Cronkite was asked about this later and said he doesn't deserve full credit. It was just one of the many straws that broke the back of the U.S. government, as they acknowledged by 68 that winning in Vietnam was an impossibility. Keep in mind, it would take Nixon several years to negotiate a final truce there in Vietnam. And a little bit of sports news. A 16-year-old kid named Tiger Woods on this day in 1992 made his PGA debut at the Nissan LA Open.
And most Tiger Woods' son, Charlie, who's 15 years old, now trying to make a name for himself in the golf world as well.
Yeah, his first tournament starts on Thursday, Jill. So we'll be watching Charlie Woods' debut later this week.
I don't know if you have seen him, but he is like a mini Tiger Woods.
Oh, it's incredible. The videos online showing literally the mannerisms down to a T, if you will, golf-wise. Maybe it's totally modeled after his father. Maybe it's innate in the Woods genes, but pretty incredible to watch. So we'll watch Charlie Woods and his career as he's only 15 years old. All right, we end here with some musical history. On this day, 31 years ago, 1993, a little ditty by Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You, reached the 14th week at number 1, a new record. Remember, it's actually a Dolly Parton song that Whitney Houston really made her own, her version of it, a classic. And finally, Jill, we like to remember disco here once in a while. The first and final Grammy for Best Disco Recording was awarded to Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. On this day, 44 years ago, on this day in 1980, they realized that disco was a thing. So the Recording Academy is like, we should put together a Grammy for Best Disco Recording. So they give the award to Gloria Gaynor, but very quickly thereafter, America falls out of love with disco to the point where they discontinue the Grammy for Best Disco. And so disco really sees this incredible rise and then this incredible collapse. There's a great documentary on the Bee Gees over on HBO Max that really takes you through just like the surge in interest and then America just hating on disco very quickly thereafter.
As you said, the first and only Grammy for disco.
Listen, I will tell you this. There are a number of classic disco songs to this day that, get you dancing. You can't go to a wedding these days very rarely without hearing some song from the disco era. And yet, America was just like, we're so into it and we so hate it. And that was even without social media. But that's how quickly the taste changed. And people became embarrassed to even like disco. But come on. Secretly, you hear a Bee Gees song from Saturday Night Fever. You like it. It's good.
All right. Well, hopefully you're not embarrassed if anyone hears you listening to the Mo News podcast. Thank you, by the way, for listening to our daily podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Yes, and you can track coverage all day of all things Michigan primary, everything else that's going on over on our Instagram feed. Also, sign up for our newsletter, mo.news/newsletter, to get that in your inbox every day in case you can't get to the podcast or if you're just looking for more. So we have the newsletter available for you. And then if you want to support us, we would so appreciate it. You can do that over at mo.news/premium. It allows you to support Mo News and get access to our premium feed, both podcast and our members only Instagram feed.
All right, everyone, have a great Tuesday.